Welcome to the Christian Business Concepts with your host, Harold Milby. Christian Business Concepts is dedicated to guiding companies and business owners in becoming effective, efficient, and successful through God's Word and godly principles. Now, here's your host, Harold Milby.
Thanks again, Kelly, and welcome everyone to this week's Christian Business Concepts podcast. You know, our mission here at CBC is to help you find true godly success by applying biblical principles. And I hope and I pray that you'll be encouraged and enlightened and empowered by today's podcast, and hope that you'll help us to grow the CBC family by sharing today's podcast with 4 or 5 other people, and even maybe posting this episode on one of your LinkedIn pages or your Facebook pages. You know, we just thank you for helping us to grow the family and being a part of this community. Today I want to give a big shout out to the country of Zambia. We appreciate you, those of you there in Zambia, for becoming a part of the Christian Business Concepts community. We appreciate allowing us to be a part of your personal growth plan. And we appreciate and pray for all of you, whether you are listening to this podcast for the first time or whether you download a podcast every week when they come out on Wednesdays. We are so proud to have you a part of it, and we're very humbled by the number of you that participate every week. Now, in today's business spotlight, I want to talk about a company called Sunshine Nut Company. In his mid-40s, Don Larson left his executive position at Hershey, which was a very lucrative business. It was a very lucrative position that he had with Hershey, and he helped Hershey to source a lot of supply that they needed, so it took him all around the world, and work took him to Africa, and he was there to source some cocoa, and he was absolutely appalled at the conditions in Mozambique. And so he started this company in 2011, and for the primary reason of helping the people, helping the farmers, and really helping whole communities. He really practices reverse tithing. What is that? Well, that's where he keeps 10% of the profits and he gives away 90%. And that money goes to help transform schools, bring about greater nutrition, healthcare, housing. He's also involved in orphanages, and a lot of those children, after they get through the orphanage, or even if they're adopted, he hires those people, and they become good mature adults that are giving back into their community. So he's really making a difference in Mozambique. And they've become now one of the largest companies in the world that supplies fresh nuts. And they do some things very unusual. They freeze dry these nuts as soon as they're picked. Nobody else does that. And so he has come up with this idea, and he did that when he was over there trying to source cocoa, and he happened to notice there was a lot of nut farms there in Mozambique. And so he, because of the conditions that he saw, he went back home and he was completely convicted in his heart. And so he gave up the lucrative position, he sold everything he had, and he moved over there to start the Sunshine Nut Company. And so they're influencing really thousands of people on a regular basis, as much as 100,000 people on a regular basis. And they're trying to help other businesses in the country to repeat his model, to do some of the same things that they're doing. So the next time you pick up a bag of Sunshine Nuts, think about the lives that are being impacted for the gospel. And we just appreciate you, Sunshine. We appreciate the work that you're doing. Keep it up, and we thank God for you. Now, as Christian business leaders and in the professional world, you're going to encounter a lot of different people. Some of these people are going to work for you. Some of them are not. Some are going to be, you're going to meet them intentionally. Some are going to be unintentionally. And some people that you're going to run into can hinder you. They can hinder your effectiveness. They can drain your energy. They can really take your eye off of the God-given purpose that God's given you. And you need to recognize these individuals. And recognize these individuals and managing relationships with them is really critical to maintaining your spiritual and emotional and professional health. So today I want to outline some key types of individuals to be aware of and why this awareness is important. And, and then I want to give you some biblical grounded strategies that will help you deal with each one of these different type of people. And so why should we even be talking about this? Why is this important? Well, number one, it's basically trying to help you be a good steward of your time and your energy. Your time and your energy are finite resources. You don't have it. You have so much time in a day. You've got so much energy. And allowing other people to drain you of these resources can really stop and hinder you from fulfilling the calling that God's put on your life. And, I would encourage you to read Ephesians chapter 5 because it talks about this. And the second thing is it's really important for your emotional and spiritual health because negative or toxic relationships can lead to burnout, to frustration, or spiritual discouragement. And that's going to hinder your ability to lead, and not just to lead people, but to lead people with joy. So that's important. Third, organizational effectiveness. As a leader, your well-being directly impacts your team. It directly impacts your team as a leader. So you want to protect yourself from anything that's, any kind of influence that drains you. You want to be able to make sure that you can lead with strength and vision, like Nehemiah did. And I would encourage you to just read Nehemiah 6, verses 1 through 9. And then number 4, having a Christ-like discernment. Jesus modeled discernment in his interactions. And he balanced compassion with boundaries. And as leaders, you're called to love others while maintaining a focus on God's priorities. So it's really important that we identify these individuals, we're aware of them, and then we give you some biblical principles on how to deal with these individuals. So the first one, is the chronic complainer. The chronic complainer. These are people that just constantly focus on problems. They don't come to you with any solutions. They just bring problems to you. And let's be honest, we can always find people to help you identify what the problems are. The issue is trying to find people that can bring you solutions. But the chronic complainer doesn't do that. They just come and they complain. They complain about circumstances. They complain about some of their coworkers. They complain about leadership's decisions. They rarely express gratitude or optimism. And they're going to seek you out, and they'll do it repeatedly because they want to vent. And they want you to allow them to vent without you taking any kind of action. So why is this a problem? Well, chronic complainers kind of zap you of your emotional energy, and it kind of creates a negative atmosphere. Their focus on problems is what causes this distraction because, instead of you being able to focus on strategic priorities, you're having to focus on a lot of negativity. And if it goes unchecked, their attitude may influence other people in your organization. So how do you deal with them? Well, first of all, you've got to politely but firmly, and I mean that politely but firmly, you've got to limit the time that you spend listening to those complaints. For example, you could say something like, I hear your concern. Let's take 5 minutes to discuss a possible solution. So what you're doing is you're getting their focus away from complaining and saying, okay, let's come up with a solution. If you do that long enough, those people will begin to change the way they come to you. And a lot of times they won't come to you until they have a solution, which is what you're looking for. So you want to redirect them. And then after you set those boundaries, you redirect with those solutions. You help them, encourage them to propose some kind of solution, something that's actionable. Ask them, hey, what steps do you think we can take to address this issue? And that shifts the conversation from venting to problem solving. You also want to model positivity. You want to reflect Philippians 4:8 by focusing on what's true and noble and praiseworthy in your interactions. And your example can influence their perspective completely. And then you need to pray for discernment, pray for patience. Ask God for wisdom to discern when to engage and when to redirect. Pray for that person's heart. Help them to find peace. Pray for them to find peace and gratitude. And then again, limit your access. If that behavior continues, you have to reduce your access that they have to you, and you delegate this communication to somebody that you trust on your team. Or you can schedule specific times for these kinds of discussions. Zig Ziglar, I grew up with. I read a lot of his books from the time I was 17 years old. He had a great influence on my life. But he said one time, be grateful for what you have and stop complaining. It bores everybody else, does you no good, and doesn't solve any problems. And that's it in a nutshell. All right, the second person that you got to be aware of is the time waster. Now, this is a person that frequently interrupts with very non-urgent issues and matters. They engage in very lengthy, unfocused conversations or meetings. They request a lot of time, very excessive amount of time for certain things or tasks that could be handled a lot more efficiently. And they may lack self-awareness about the value of your time. As a leader, you have to be on the hunt to protect your time. And they may not be aware of that. So why is this a problem? Well, time wasters are going to derail your schedule. They'll prevent you from focusing on really high priority tasks. As a leader, your time is so critical. It's such a critical resource for advancing your organization's mission or your department's mission. And so allowing these interactions to persist can lead to frustration and reduce productivity. Even Charles Darwin said one time, a man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. And I think that's apropos for what we're talking about. So how do you deal with these people? Well, first thing that you've got to do is you've got to establish some very clear expectations. So you need to set some specific times for meetings, communicate your availability. For example, hey, I'm available for a 15-minute discussion at 2:00. So you've already told them up front, you got 15 minutes. And you keep that. You stay that and keep your conviction on that. And then use some time management tools. Implement tools like agendas, time sensitive meetings, task management software to keep things real focused. And then when it's appropriate, you need to delegate. So you can assign some non-critical tasks or discussions to other team members to free up your time. So I think that's important. And then be direct. Be direct with grace. If somebody consistently oversteps, what you want to do is just be real kind, but you can address it. And you can say something like, hey, look, I value our conversations, but I need to focus on X, whatever that priority is. Let's schedule a time to connect. Well, that lets them know that what they have to say is important and that you see it as important, but you have something that's a lot more priority right now that you need to focus on. And then lastly, seek God's guidance. Pray for wisdom. You've got to be able to balance accessibility with discipline. And Jesus gives us that example. He retreated. He got away at times. He focused on himself sometimes when he would get away. So you can see that in Luke chapter 5, verse 16. So you really have to take a look at that. And then number 3 is what I call the energy vampire. I call them the energy vampire. And these people will leave you feeling emotionally drained after every time you have an interaction with them, after every meeting. You almost feel like they've just stuck a straw in you and they're just draining you dry. Some of these people may be needy. They may be overly needy. And they just seem to demand constant attention, constant validation. They seem to focus more on their own problems or their own insecurities. They can also be very manipulative. They use guilt sometimes or drama to keep you engaged. And so why is this a problem? Well, energy vampires consume your emotional and spiritual reserves, right? So it leaves you less equipped to be able to lead effectively. And if you're exposed to people like that in a prolonged time period, it can really lead to burnout or resentment, and that kind of hurts your ability to be a good leader and to be effective. So how do you deal with them? Well, first, you've got to guard your heart. That's the first thing. You need to follow Proverbs 4:23 by protecting your emotional energy and limit the frequency, limit the depth of the interactions that you have with these types of people. And then you've got to set some very firm boundaries. You've got to be able to decline. You can be very polite about it, but you've got to decline excessive demands. For example, you can say something like, look, I care about your situation, but I can't address this right now. Can we reconnect later? So let them know that this is a personal thing and this is a business endeavor, and those two don't always mix. It's not that you don't care about your team, your employees, but the people who zap you of your energy are some of the most dangerous people you can have if you're a business leader. So do that, and then offer very limited support, because the more support you give them, the more support they're going to want. So provide them some resources. Maybe help them find a good counselor or a mentor or another team member to help them to address their needs without relying solely on you. That's the danger. And then pray for their healing. Intercede for their emotional and spiritual growth. Ask God to bring some wholeness to their life. I think that's extremely important, when you're dealing with these kinds of people. The next person that you have to be aware of is what I call the manipulator. And these are the people, they'll use flattery, they'll use guilt, they'll use pressure to influence your decisions. And a lot of them will have hidden agendas. They're looking for personal gain at your expense. They'll often disregard your boundaries or your priorities. But yet these people can seem very charming, very supportive, but they really act in their own self-interest. Now, why is this a problem? Well, manipulators can undermine your leadership, and they can exploit your trust. They can divert resources for their own benefit. Their actions really kind of erode team morale and trust. And as a Christian leader, you've got to discern their motives so you can protect the mission that that God's given you. So how do you deal with these people? Well, first, you got to seek some discernment. So you got to pray for the Holy Spirit to guide you to be able to recognize manipulative behavior. John 16:13 says that when the Spirit of truth would come, he would lead us and guide us into all truth. And so that's what we're asking God for, is to give you that understanding, to let him lead you into all truth so that you can get that guidance to recognize this kind of behavior. And then you need to be very transparent. Document decisions and interactions to ensure that this person is accountable. You want to avoid any kind of private commitments that could be misconstrued. You really have to be careful here, but you have to assert boundaries. You've got to really clearly state your priorities, state your decisions. For example, you could say something, look, I've prayerfully considered this and my decision is X. Don't say things like, well, I'm kind of thinking. No, you've got to be very clear, very decisive so that they understand that there is no wiggle room. And then you confront them. Do it with love, do it with truth. If necessary, you've got to address this behavior directly. And you can use Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17 as a guide, but you need to speak truthfully while you're showing grace. That's so critical, so very important. And then surround yourself with godly counsel. Get advice from mentors or advisors that are in your life and help them to validate your perspective and to not allow you to be swayed by this type of person. And so those are some of the things that you can do to deal with them. So what's the next person? Well, the next person is what I call the chronic critic. So these are people that are constantly pointing out flaws or mistakes. They don't offer any kind of constructive feedback. They just criticize. They may criticize your leadership style, maybe some of the decisions you make or the vision that you have. A lot of times they'll lack humility. They're not real open to dialogue a lot of times. And they kind of create a culture of fear or defensiveness within your team. So why is this a problem? Well, chronic critics can really erode your confidence and create division within your organization. Their negativity can distract from your mission and discourage other people. So while you want constructive feedback, that's valuable. You want that. But chronic criticism is often really unhelpful, and it's even demoralizing. What did Theodore Roosevelt say? He said one time, it behooves every man to remember that the work of the critic is of altogether secondary importance, and that in the end, progress is accomplished by the man who does things. Typically, the critic is not going to deal with anything. So, they're just going to criticize, but they don't perform. So how do you deal with them? Well, first of all, you've got to have evaluate some feedback, discern whether their criticism has any kind of merit, and maybe they just don't deliver it very well. If it's valid, you've got to act on it. If it's unfounded, you just got to release it to God. Just let it go. Another thing you can do is respond, but do it with grace. So you want to avoid being defensive. You just want to respond calmly. You can say something like, hey, thanks for sharing that. I'll prayerfully consider your feedback. That's fine. And then you leave it at that. And then set some boundaries for engagement. So you limit time spent addressing their criticism, and then you redirect them to formal feedback channels. Maybe you've got a suggestion process or something like that, but you kind of refunnel them or redirect them into these other feedback channels. And then make sure that you foster a real positive culture in your company. If you do that, a lot of these kinds of people will either have to change or they'll leave because they can't operate in a real positive culture. So you want to do that. And then pray for their heart. Ask God to soften their heart and guide them toward humility and encouragement. I think those are very important ways that you can deal with them. And then lastly, we have the boaster. The boaster always is looking for attention. He's looking for validation mostly through self-promotion and exaggeration. They frequently inflate their accomplishments or maybe their skills or their influence. And a lot of times they present themselves as more successful or capable than they really are. They really have a craving for praise and recognition, admiration from other people, and they may kind of fish around for compliments. They tend to monopolize discussions because they want to focus on their own stories, their own experiences or opinions, and they often interrupt, and they really kind of dismiss other people's contributions. And most of the time they'll lack humility, and so why is this a problem? Well, the boaster, which is characterized by self-promotion, exaggeration, they can create several challenges in a professional setting. It really kind of drains energy. Tension's always got to be on them. It undermines maybe your company's morale. It creates a lot of distrust, and it conflicts really with Christian values. It distracts from the mission. So how do you deal with them? Well, first of all, you've got to model humility. I think that's important. Next, you've got to redirect conversations to more focus on the shared goals. So you gently steer discussions away from their self-promotion towards what are the organizational objectives or your team's contributions. This will keep interactions productive. You can say things like, hey, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Let's focus on how this aligns with our project goals. What specific steps can we take next? And just kind of turn their attention to that. And then make sure that you set some clear boundaries. You just kind of politely limit the time spent on their focusing on their personal narratives. Use time management techniques, set meetings, and then encourage constructive contributions. Channel their energy into a more meaningful action type of specific ideas and contributions. And so this kind of helps shift their focus from boasting to problem solving. And then hold them accountable. When boasters make bold claims, follow up with clear expectations and timelines to ensure they deliver. So that helps distinguish their, if they have any kind of genuine capability, and it helps you distinguish between that and exaggeration, and it helps you to maintain that accountability. And then pray for discernment, pray for grace. Again, seek God's wisdom to discern this boaster's intentions and respond to them with love. John 16:13. That's how we are to know we are his disciples, is if we love one another. So make sure that you at least do that. And so pray for patience to engage with them without frustration, and for their heart to grow in more humility. And so that's very, very important. And so these are the 5 that I would say or 6 that you really have to be aware of as you're building a business or a department. As you add more employees, you're going to come across some of these people. So your next step should be, number 1, develop a personal action plan. So identify who these people are, write down some specific boundaries and strategies for each of these people. Next, you strengthen your spiritual foundation so that you stay spiritually strong. So make sure you have a daily prayer and scripture reading time to stay grounded. And third, you can build a support network. So make sure that you've got godly mentors around you, some good team members who uplift and challenge you in a positive way. And then train your team, equip your team to recognize and manage these behaviors as well. And then lastly, you can evaluate on a regular basis. So you want to periodically assess your own personal energy levels and your time balance, and make sure you're adjusting boundaries and strategies as you need to make sure you keep a good balance. So as Christian business leaders, you're called to lead with love and wisdom and discernment. But by recognizing these kinds of individuals who drain your energy or waste your time, you can protect your God-given mission and really lead with greater effectiveness. And through prayer and biblical principles and practical strategies, you can manage these relationships with grace while staying focused on God's purpose for your leadership. So we just hope that you can, walk in the strength of Proverbs 3, 5 through 6, trusting that God is going to guide your path as you navigate a lot of these challenges when you're dealing with these kinds of people. Father, thank you right now for those who have decided to listen to this podcast today. And Lord, I pray and I believe if they will apply these principles, Lord, they're going to find great success as a leader. And Lord, I pray that they'll be able to recognize the dangers that the people that we've discussed can bring. Lord, help them to deal with these people in a godly manner and not allow them to hinder, Lord, the vision that you've given them. And Lord, I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So thanks again for downloading this week's CBC podcast and for helping us reach 1 million business leaders. Together, we're helping business leaders find true godly success. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So until next time, remember, Jesus is Lord and He wants you blessed.
Thank you for tuning into this week's Christian Business Concepts podcast. Go to ChristianBusinessConcepts.com for more information and resources. Be sure to check out other podcasts that will help you take your business and your personal life to a whole new level of success.